Okay, now let's talk about bootstrapping. Bootstrapping is a term that was actually derived from the phrase pulling oneself up by their bootstraps, which means you were actually helping yourself, doing more with less. Bootstrapping can act as a substitute for early stage capital, and some very interesting statistics put out by the Federal Reserve, the U.S. Federal Reserve, estimated that 70% of all startups are actually bootstrapped. And the National Federation of Business also says that all U.S. businesses have been started with $500 or less, which is, to me, is an amazing statistic. So how do you bootstrap? So what you do is you basically focus on how can I do things without money, basically, versus looking to raise immediate funding. The reason you want to do bootstrapping, by the way, is that the longer you can do a company or run a company or get the company going with bootstrapping, without borrowing somebody's money and without giving them equity, the more you're likely to benefit from any exit you may eventually have in that company, or the higher valuation you'll probably get when you raise your first institutional round. Of course, the disadvantages of bootstrapping is that you're using your own personal resources and assets, and that could be a drain that you never recover. And it also, because of the lack of funding, it could take you longer to get to market. So some techniques and strategies you should follow when you're thinking about bootstrapping is, get started. Get started right away on your ideas. But for a short time at least, don't quit your day job, because you got to have some way to pay your bills and feed your family if you have one. So don't delay though, just because you're bootstrapping a company. You want to really focus on cash flow and keep your staff, if you have staff, focused on producing income, so that, because raising money is not a substitute for actually making money. And if you can make money, fund your operations with at least partially fund it with revenues, that's a very positive result. So you want to be frugal, but you don't want to be cheap when you're bootstrapping. So you have to distinguish between what are the absolutely necessary costs I need to do to get this company going, but also look at what costs you can avoid in the short term. So you want to look for ways to leverage what assets you have, and do things without cash, like licensing in technology, entering into joint ventures, getting strategic partners, any way you can, or even exchanging what you're doing or your product or your service in exchange for something that you need in your business. You can trade equity for services, like a lot of consultants or lawyers or accountants will actually agree to take some equity in your company in exchange for providing you with legal work or consulting work or accounting work. But be very careful when you do that type of thing that you're cognizant of the securities laws in whatever country you're operating in, so you don't get yourself in trouble in that regard. Okay, you can also do things like look for, if you need to get assets for your operation, you can look for used assets versus buying them new, and look for some people that you might know who have underutilized resources that they have, that you could strike a deal with them. Look for ways to be creative and use the resources you have creatively, so that you can lower the cost of doing business. And one of the things that's important to remember is, don't think that just because you're bootstrapping a company that your company is perceived as a low budget operation. There are lots of things you can do at very low cost that gives you the appearance that that you're more well financed. Like, you can generate some interesting letterhead for not very much money. You can get some very professionally done business cards, develop a web page. These days you can develop a website for next to nothing. Get a voicemail system, even if you have to just use kind of your local cell phone provider's voicemail, if you have a cell phone, or if you're using cell phone in your business. Set it up so that it appears that you have a system working in place, and that'll give people a perception that you're more well financed. And also talk to people about using their resources. For example, if you have a lawyer friend or somebody who's actually helping you for some equity piece of the business, use their conference rooms, ask them if you can borrow their conference rooms for meetings and that kind of thing. All these things give people a perception of a much better financed company. Again, find companies that are not using their resources 24/7 and see if you can figure out a way to have them let you borrow them or use them at no cost. And partner with more established companies if that's possible. And then a lot of people use interns. A lot of students in university, for example, will work as interns either at very low rates or for free just to get the experience. One of the things that bootstrapping does is it demonstrates to a new investor or a prospective investor when you're ready to raise money that you've actually been creative and you've made some sacrifices along the way. And that is a positive message to send to these folks. Leverage your assets, exchange what you have for things that you need. And don't give up. Entrepreneurship is a very difficult thing. As I say, it's a marathon, not a sprint. Rely on your own personal assets, your self-confidence, rely on co-founders, friends and family. There's going to be a difficult time when you're first starting a company. There'll be sleepless nights, but don't give up. Keep the faith. If you have passion for what you're doing, that will help you get through this difficult time. One thing that's important to remember is when you're bootstrapping and things get tough, you want to make sure that you maintain your integrity and your ethics. Don't allow yourself to slip outside the bounds that you set for yourself from the standpoint of integrity and ethics. And also you have to be aware at some point it's time to stop bootstrapping and actually go out and find an investor, because bootstrapping can only get you so far. And if you have employees involved, they're likely to become, let's say, frustrated if they see the company progressing to a point, but realize that they can't really grow it past where they are without additional resources. So pay attention to when you need to stop bootstrapping. This is a really good example of a company. Some people think, well, bootstrapping a company, you're not going to generate a very large operation and it's not going to be very successful. Well, here's a good example of a company that belies that theory. A company called Domo. They started out as a bootstrap operation. Basically, this person who started the company, Josh James, he basically bootstrapped the company. He built a capability that essentially enabled executives to access data and information from a number of disparate sources and pulled it all together in one integrated platform. And that company, from a bootstrapped start, grew to a very successful company. And as this slide shows, they raised $125 million at the valuation of almost $1 billion. So don't equate bootstrapping with a low value operation. That's not the way it has to be. So bootstrapping may be the best way to get started when you're starting a new company. Certainly it helps you maintain your equity. If you can build traction, you'll get better valuations when you raise money. You'll get a better piece of the pie when you exit the company. And don't equate bootstrapping to small, because you've just seen a company that raised a lot of money at $1 billion valuation that started out as a bootstrapper.